At your job, do you ever have to deal with a nose roller? How about a snub pulley? Well, if you're installing a new conveyor belt system, dealing with the different components can sound like you're speaking a foreign language. Luckily, you've got a team ready to help. Grainger's technical product specialists are fluent in maintenance, repair, and operations. So whenever you want to talk shop, just reach out. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
The ideal cabinet secretary will have exceptional organizational skills and be a seasoned political operative or attorney. Because many cabinet officia have been former presidential candidates, governors, ambassadors, and members of Congress, the ideal candidate should also possess the ability to interact with and persuade accomplished individuals. Office of Public Liaison, the OPL is critically important in building.
So right now they're describing the different departments of the government and how they intend to take them over, like the Office of Public Liaison and stuff.
Coalitions and support for the president's agenda across every aligned social, faith-based, minority, and economic interest group. Tool for shaping public opinion and keeping myriad supporters, as well as frenemies and opponents alike, who are within reach, better informed. The OPL
Frenemies
is a notably large OFFE. It should have one director who reports to the Chief of Staff's OFFE, either directly or through a deputy, according to the Chief's preference and focus. The director must maintain relationships not only with other WHO heads, but also with the senior staff of every cabinet department and agency.
It's interesting that in the last one, they basically created a framework to erase the administrative, like the people that administrate everything, the people at the DMV and everybody all along the road in the government, they will all be eliminated and replaced with Trump supporters. Whether they know how to do the job, it is immaterial to them having the position. They will learn on the job. That's kind of how they intend to do it. They being the writers of Project 2025. So that's what they were describing the last one. Now they're describing the roles that they intend to replace.
Since a president's agenda is always in motion, it is important for the OPL to facilitate listening sessions to receive the views of the various leaders and members of key interest groups. The OPL should also have a sufficient number of deputies and special assistants to cover the vast number of disparate interest groups that are engaged daily. The has by far held more meetings in the Eisenhower Executive Office Building, EEOB, and within the West Wing itself than any other office within the WHO. The OPL is the chief White House enforcer and gatekeeper among these various interest groups. It has operated best whenever the Chief of Staff has given it permission to use both the proverbial carrot and the proverbial stick. To make this work, communication with the Chief's office is vital. Additionally, the OPL has had an outsized role in presidential scheduling and both office and political travel. The OPL director should come from the president's election campaign or Capitol Hill, but should not have deeply entrenched connections to a K Street entity or any other potential stakeholder.
So they're saying basically that the leader of this kind of political position shouldn't be involved in politics at all. They should be loyal solely to Donald Trump. That's what they're outlining here.
Some prior relationships can create real or perceived biases toward one group or another. The director should be amiable, gregarious, highly organized, and willing to shoulder criticism and pushback from interest groups and other elements of the administration.
This is wild. Just the way that they're describing all of this is just so strange.
Unlike the director, OPL deputies and special assistants need a deep understanding of the Capitol, from K Street to Capitol Hill. They should have extensive experience in private industry, the labor sector, the conservative movement, and among the specified interest groups with which they will be asked to engage on behalf of the White House.
Like, I know you're thinking to yourself, like, how are they going to find this person? Like, this is a really weirdly specific description of somebody. And the answer is Project 2025 has a database of people. They created a database where they encouraged people who may or may not be qualified to sign up. If you're a Trump supporter and you're willing to work in government, that's all that matters. We will train you on the job. To be Secretary of State or whatever, doesn't even matter. We'll train you on the job.
OPL staffer work with more external and internal parties than any other WHO staffer. In turn, they must be effective communicators and initiative takers. They must also be able to influence, persuade, and most important, listen to various stakeholders and ensure that they feel heard. All OPL staffer must understand from the outset that their jobs might be modified or even phased out entirely as the administration's priorities change. Office of Intergovernmental Affairs, IGA. The IGA connects the White House to state, county, local, and tribal governments. In other words, it is the one-stop shop for disseminating an administration's agenda to all non-federal government entities. The IGA should have a director to whom one or two deputy directors report. The director must ensure that the White House remains connected to all non-federal government entities. The interests and perspectives of these entities are represented in policy discussions, organized events with the West Wing, EOP senior staff, and IGA staff throughout the departments and agencies. The IGA can be staffed in a variety of ways, but two arrangements are most common. Each deputy and that deputy staffer are responsible for a type of government. A group of staffer is responsible for a specified geographical region of the country. As suggested above, represents the interests and perspectives of non-federal government entities, but its primary job is to make sure that these entities understand an administration's agenda and ultimately support it. The IGA must...
So their responsibility is to understand what Donald Trump wants and support it unconditionally. I could be wrong. Let me just verify what I'm about to say. Hang on. Yeah. Yep. Here we go. This is Donald Trump, or the Trump administration or whatever, clearing out everybody in government and replacing them with their own people. They're not legally allowed to fire people without cause, to my knowledge. They have to have good reason. So they offered them buyouts. The goal, the premise behind Project 2025, the foundation sits upon the idea that they can get rid of all of the federal employees and replace them with Trump supporters. The DMV is a state-level agency, but just as an example, Trump would want to replace people even at the DMV everywhere along the line, because you never know which department is going to be useful to your ends. Like, the manager of the DMV can decide to just throw out, voter registration stuff. When people, get their license or whatever, you can register to vote. They just throw that out, not do it. It's illegal, but they're Trump supporters, and that's what matters. And they'll decide the constitutionality of it later. I mean, this is outlined in Project 2025. It's not speculation. I'm describing what this document wants. I just finished writing a book titled Was Hitler an Atheist? It talks about religions during the Third Reich and how they work together. Catholics, Jehovah's Witnesses, and Protestants. And I even address the lies told by the evangelical world about Bonhoeffer. It's on Audible and Amazon. Okay, let's continue. Just listen to this breakdown here. This is on CNBC, by the way.
The Trump administration is offering millions of federal workers the option to accept buyouts through a government-wide deferred resignation program if they quit by February 6th.
I believe that there are only 2 million workers in government or somewhere in that vicinity. I'm talking FBI, IRS, EPA, SEC, everybody, the FCC, the FTC, ATF, all of them. They're all, I think they all add up to about 2 million people. And Trump offered them buyouts so that instead of firing them, which they can't do, so that they can just replace them with Trump supporters.
Those who accept the offer will receive pay and benefits through September 30th, according to emails sent out across the federal government Tuesday evening by the U.S. Office of Personnel Management. Those employees will not be expected to work after taking the offer, OPM specified. To accept the buyout, they simply have to reply to the email with the word resign, the emails instruct. The sweeping proposal is being offered to make sure that all federal workers are on board with the new administration's plan to have federal employees in office and adhering to higher standards. A senior administration official told NBC News on condition of anonymity earlier Tuesday. We're 5 years past COVID and just 6% of federal employees work full-time in office. That is unacceptable, the official said, citing a report from Senator Joni Ernst, R. Iowa, who co-chairs the Congressional Doge Caucus.
Okay, that doesn't sound right. 6% of federal employees work in the office because they're all remote? That does not sound right at all. I'm sorry. But either way, why do you care? Why does it matter if they're getting their job done? I don't understand.
The White House expects up to 10% of federal employees to take the buyout, the official said. Elon Musk, the leader of President Donald Trump's Department of Government Efficiency, praised the buyout offer as fair and generous on X, the social media platform he owns. Musk, after taking...
So anyway, the point is that this is the attempt at replacing government employees with Trump supporters, with people that voted for Trump. And it doesn't even matter what these people do. It doesn't matter how experienced they are. It doesn't matter. What matters is that they support him, bottom line. Anyway, let's continue. That's what they're outlining here is the point.
The IGA must work with all other White House office, especially the OPA and the OPL, and manage its staff throughout the departments and agencies. IGA staffers must therefore have communication skills, understand political nuance, and be willing to engage in complex policy discussions. They should also be not just generally responsive, but also proactive in seeking out the interests and perspectives of non-federal government entities. White House policy councils. As the federal government has ballooned in size over the past century, it has become increasingly difficult for the president alone to direct his agenda across the executive branch.
This is feeding into this idea that big government is bad. It's not. Like, I like the Medicaid program, and I think it should be expanded to everybody. For example, that's big. That is government using more money to do more things. That's a good thing. I like that a lot. The military budget is larger today than it has ever been, to my knowledge. And maybe it's too big, but that's an example of a way in which a lot of people are okay with big government. Big government isn't the problem. It's what they are doing specifically that's the problem, not by its very nature. But aside from all of that, that's the trope that they're shouting out to and complaining about right now, that it's bloated or whatever.
3 White House policy councils have come into existence to help the president to control the bureaucracy and ensure continued alignment between agency leadership and White House priorities. Those councils, as previewed above, are the NSC, NEC, and DPC. Each is headed by an assistant to the president and performs 3 significant functions. L. Policy coordination. The primary role of the policy councils is to coordinate the development of administration policy. This frequently includes developing significant legislative priorities, coordinating policy decisions that impact multiple departments and agencies, and at times coordinating policy decisions within a single department or agency. This process must ensure that all relevant office are included, that competing or conflicting opinions are thoroughly discussed and evaluated, and, when there is disagreement among White House senior staff or among cabinet members, a well-structured question is presented to the president for an intermediate or final decision. L. Policy advice. By virtue of working in the White House, the heads of the 3 policy councils will also function as independent policy advisors to the president. This aspect of the role will vary depending on the individual in this position and the president's governing philosophy. Incumbents have ranged from honest brokers, who mostly coordinate and ensure that all opinions are fairly presented to the president, to policy deciders, who largely drive a given policy topic on behalf of the president. L. Policy implementation. The policy councils also manage.
When you hear it say L policy implementation, it's giving a list. I don't know why it puts an L in place of like a dot for a list or something. But yeah, it's not bad. It helps us get through 900 pages of manifesto a lot faster and easier for what that's worth.
On behalf of the president. L. Policy implementation. The policy councils also manage and mediate the implementation of previous policy decisions. Implementation of a new statute or an executive order frequently takes years and involves many distinct and more granular policy decisions along the way. It is essential to have a centralized process for evaluating and coordinating these decisions, especially if they involve more than one cabinet department or agency with different opinions on the best approach for securing the president's goals. The above functions have recently been managed by policy councils through a tiered interagency policy process. This process helps to identify difference of opinion and reach a decision without having to take every issue to the president.
But they all have to be in line with what Trump wants. They all have to be of one mind. They're trying to create a government of one mind. In the past, we have used democracy to come to conclusions, to make laws, use public opinion to whatever. Executive orders are like an outlined power of the president, but they're very undemocratic. It's a lot of power in one person's hands, and it shouldn't be. But they're trying to expand the president's power even further. If the SEC, the FDA, and every other 3-letter agency out there, the NSA, the CIA, the FBI, if they all follow exactly what Donald Trump wants, if they're all exactly in line, he doesn't even need to pass laws or executive orders. He doesn't need to rely on Congress or any of that stuff. They'll just do what he wants without him even having to ask. The Department of Justice, if they don't want to prosecute Republicans, but they do want to prosecute Democrats, that's what they'll do. Trump doesn't even have to ask. The president didn't have to pass a law that said, don't prosecute Republicans. They just won't. That's how this works. That's the goal here. That's how they intend to ultimately take control of the government and add and consolidate power in one branch.
Be used to address a single question or monitor a recurring issue on an ongoing basis. Typically, the process involves multiple cabinet departments and agencies that have a pertinent role, policy interest, or disagreement. Each policy council's process could involve the following committees. L. Policy Coordinating Committee, PCC. PCC is led by a special assistant to the president from the Policy Council and includes political assistant secretary-level experts from the relevant departments, agencies, or office. The purpose is to determine where consensus exists, clearly identify where there are differing opinions, and develop options for resolving the remaining questions. If no outstanding questions or disagreements exist, the PCC may resolve the issue and move toward implementation at the agency level.
I'm unfamiliar with the PCC, but I guess it's like another three-letter agency, another organization controlled technically under the executive branch, like under the president's branch of government.
Deputies Committee. A DC is a meeting of presidentially appointed executives chaired by the Policy Council's deputy assistant to the president and relevant deputy secretaries. It evaluates the options produced by the PCC and frequently directs the PCC to add, expand, or reevaluate an option, or even to reach a compromise and resolve an issue at that level. L Principals Committee. When questions are not resolved by a DC, the director of the Policy Council will chair a PC, which is attended by the relevant cabinet secretaries and senior White House political staff. The FINA opportunity for the president's most senior advisors to discuss the question, make sure that each principal's position is carefully understood, and see whether consensus or a compromise might be reached. If not, the Chief of Staff's OFI will schedule time for the PC to meet with the president for a FINA decision. Despite having seemingly clear and separate portfolios, the three policy councils frequently have areas of overlap.
What they're describing here is the three-letter agencies doing whatever Donald Trump wants, when in reality, the FBI, the NSA, the EPA, and everybody else all along the line, they should be doing their job, not what the president wants. It shouldn't be a politicized position. They should just go to work every day, see that this company is polluting a water source that the town uses, and fine them for it and go home. And that's it. But they're trying to kind of create a scenario in which Trump doesn't have to tell them what to do. They just stop fining the company. They just don't say anything. They don't bother looking for January 6th rioters because who cares? They're Trump supporters. It doesn't matter. That's the environment that they want to create. That's the scenario they're trying to produce here. And that they're succeeding at producing.
Which can result in confusion, duplication, or conflict. For example, there are the areas of immigration and border security, either NSC or DPC, healthcare, energy and environment, either NEC or DPC, and trade and international economic policy, either NEC. Identifying these potentially problematic areas and assigning policy responsibilities to only one council where possible will help to speed up the policy coordination process. While other chapters will cover specified policy goals for each department or agency, incoming policy councils will need to move rapidly to lead policy processes around cross-cutting agency topics, including countering China, enforcing immigration laws, reversing regulatory policies in order to promote energy production, combating the left's aggressive attacks on life and religious liberty, and confronting wokeism throughout the federal government.
They live in a delusion. Combating wokeism in the federal government. What does that even mean? And what was the other bit they said?
In order to promote energy production, combating the left's aggressive attacks on life and religious liberty.
The left is not attacking life and religious liberty. This is complete delusion.
And confronting wokeism throughout the federal government. National Security Council. The NSC is intended to be an interdepartmental body within the White House that can set national security policy with a whole-of-government approach. Unlike the other policy councils, the NSC include the President and Vice President, the Secretaries of State, Defense, and Energy, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and the Director of National Intelligence. 9. The NSC staff, and particularly the National Security Advisor, should be vetted for foreign and security policy experience and insight. The National Security Advisor and NSC staff advise the President on matters of foreign policy and national security, serve as an information conduit in times of crisis, and as liaisons, ensuring that written communications are properly shared among NSC members. Special attention should be given to the use of detailees to staff the NSC. In recent years, the NSC's staff size has been right-sized from its peak of 400 in 2015 down to 100 to 150 professional members. The next administration should try to limit the number of detailees to ensure more direct presidential control. National Economic Council. The NEC was established in 1993 by executive order and has 4 key functions. To coordinate the economic policy-making process with respect to domestic and international economic issues. L, to coordinate economic policy advice to the President. To ensure that policy decisions and programs are consistent with the President's stated goals and that those goals are being effectively pursued. L, to monitor implementation of the President's economic policy agenda. 10. The NEC Director coordinates and implements the President's economic policy objectives by working with cabinet secretaries, their departments, and multiple agencies. The Director is supported by a staff of policy experts in various fields, including infrastructure, manufacturing, research and development, agriculture, small business, financial regulation, housing, technology and innovation, and fiscal policy. The NEC considers economic policy matters, and the DPC typically considers anything related to domestic matters, with the exception of economic policy matters. It also differs from the Council of Economic Advisors, CEA.
This is just basic breakdown of the organizations, the 3-letter agencies, and how they're going to operate under the Trump administration, I guess. Still valuable to listen to just to kind of understand how they intend to structure this.
Whereas the NEC is in charge of policy development, the CEA acts as the White House's internal research arm for economic analysis. It is therefore critically important to find people with the right qualifications to head both the NEC and the CEA. The CEA is almost always led by a well-known academic economist, and the NEC is regularly led by someone with expertise in directing the president's economic policy process. Those who have ranged from former CEOs of the nation's largest investment firm to financial services industry managers to seasoned congressional staffer who have managed the economic policy issues for top financial and tax writing committees. Domestic Policy Council.
So they just said that these positions are often staffed by top economists, but we can put in business leaders. It sounded like the heads of companies. It sounded like they said.
The Domestic Policy Council, DPC.
Oh, and by the way, everybody that's staffed all the way along the line, again, is a Trump supporter. They must be. That is the sole qualification over anything else.
Consists of advisors to the president on non-economic domestic policy issues, as well as international issues with a significant domestic component, such as immigration. It is one of the primary policy councils serving the president, along with the NSC and NEC. The director serves as the principal DPC advisor to the president, along with members of the cabinet, and the deputy director chairs the committee responsible for coordinating domestic policy development at the deputy secretary level. In this respect, both the director and the deputy director have critical institutional functions that affect the development of domestic policy throughout the administration. The DPC also has policy experts, for example, special assistants to the president or SAPs, who are responsible for developing and coordinating, as well as for advising the president on specified issues. It is essential that DPC policy expertise reflect the most prominent issues that are before the administration, issues such as the environment, healthcare, housing, and immigration. In addition, DPC SAPs should demonstrate a working knowledge of the rulemaking process, although they need not necessarily be experts on regulation, because
you hearing this? These people don't necessarily need to be experts on regulation if they're in these positions. Again, the qualification is Trump supporter. That's it.
They need not necessarily be experts on regulation, because a working knowledge of the rulemaking process will facilitate the DPC's effectiveness in coordinating administration policy. The DPC also needs to work closely with other offices within the executive office of the president to promote economic opportunity and private sector innovation. This includes working with the Office of Management and Budget and its Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, as well as the Council of Economic Advisors, Council on Environmental Quality, and Office of Science and Technology. Policy. To this end, the director should chair a standing meeting with the principals from each of the other EOP office to enhance coordination from within the White House. Several areas will be especially important as the DPC works to develop a well-defined domestic policy agenda. One is the promotion of innovation as a foundation for economic growth and opportunity. The president should establish an economic opportunity working group, chaired by the DPC director, to coordinate the development of policies that promote economic opportunity. Another important area is the promotion of healthcare reform to bring down costs for the American people and the pressure that spending on health programs puts on the federal budget.
You know what's funny about this? They're saying that they need to focus on health care, blah, blah, blah. Obamacare was written by these people, by the same people who wrote Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation. They wrote it. And now they're complaining that, healthcare is draining too much money from the federal government. Oh, I guess your policy didn't work after all, huh? Oh, I guess your policy is complete shit, as it turns out. How about that? We need single payer immediately. Oh my God, dude. These people will never learn. They will never learn that their goals and interests are complete, or they will never learn that their solutions to these problems are complete shit. They're trash. They'll never learn that. I don't see them ever learning.
Finally, DPC should coordinate with the NSC on a policy agenda to enhance border security. Office of the Vice President, OVP. In modern U.S. history, the Vice President has acted as a significant advisor to the President. Once elected, the VP helps to promote and, in many instances, put into place and execute the President's agenda. The President may additionally determine the inclusion of OVP staff in White House meetings, including Policy Coordinating Committee, Deputies Committee, and Principals Committee discussions, as has been done in various recent administrations. Recent presidents have decided to give Vice Presidents space in the West Wing. The VP's proximity to the President, as well as to the Chief of Staff and additional senior advisors, makes his or her role a powerful one within the West Wing. Presidents typically tap VPs to lead various administration efforts. These efforts have included serving on the NSC Principals Committee, heading the National Space Council, addressing immigration and border issues, leading the response to healthcare crises, and supervising workforce programs. VPs traditionally also spearhead projects of personal interest that have been authorized by the President.
Yeah, again, just describing the system and how it works. The VP staying in the West Wing, I guess, and operating it with certain whatevers.
P is also charged with breaking tie votes in the Senate, and in recent years has served abroad as a brand ambassador for the White House and more broadly the United States, announcing administration priorities and coordinating with heads of state and other top foreign government officials. The Vice President, as President of the Senate, could be a President's emissary to the Senate. Office of the First Lady, First Gentleman. The First Lady or First Gentleman plays an interesting role in the formation, implementation, and execution of policy.
I find it really interesting that they included first gentleman in here, the office of the first lady or first gentleman, implying that at some point there will be a woman as the vice president under them, I guess.
In concert with the president. Active and interested first spouses often champion a select number of signature issues, whether they be thorny social issues or deeper policy issues.
I wonder what a non-binary first gentleman/lady would be. First fella, you think? First pal, maybe? That'd be cool. I think I'd pick first pal.
One advantage of the first spouses taking on hot-button social issues is that any political backlash will be less severe than it would be for the president. Spouse normally appoints a chief of staff who has enough assistants to support the spouse's activities in the East Wing of the White House.
Wow. They said one of the benefits to being vice president is that they will receive less backlash over the fucked up shit that they do. Interesting.
This group works exclusively with the first spouse and senior members of the White House, along with EOP personnel, to implement and execute the first spouse's priorities, which reflect the first spouse's passions and interests, and are often identified as important in discussions with the president.
Well, there you go. It would be first spouse. They said it.
Executed well, they can be strategically useful in accelerating the administration's agenda. Past East Wing initiatives have focused on such issues as combating drug abuse, promoting literacy, and encouraging physical education for young adults and children. The first spouse is afforded significant resources. His or her staff also works with the president's policy team, members of the cabinet, and other EOP staff. Authors note, the preparation of this chapter was a collective enterprise of individuals involved in the 2025 presidential transition project. All contributors to this chapter are listed at the front of this volume, but Edwin Meese III, Donald Devine, Ambassador Andrew Bremberg, and Jonathan Brunitsky deserve special mention.
Okay, I couldn't possibly care less about who wrote this chapter or whatever. Although I guess we should probably know, right?
The author alone assumes responsibility for the content of this chapter, and no views expressed herein should be attributed to any other individual.
Yeah, this is the end of the chapter. I remember when I was editing the audiobook, basically, I remember that this was at the end of each chapter.
Executive Office of the President of the United States. Russ Vought, agencies in staff or administrative bodies, in non-governmental organizations, or
Wait, what? I'm sorry, one more time. What was that?
Staff or administrative bodies, in non-governmental
Hold on.
Content of this chapter, and no views expressed herein should be attributed to any other individual. Executive Office of the President of the United States. Russ Vought, agencies in...
Russ Vought. He was just installed. They're talking about the people that wrote this and that are going to be involved in the next administration. And Russ Vought was just put into power. He's the director of the Office of Management and Budget, OMB. Wow, fascinating. Huh. So Donald Trump installed the people that were named in Project 2025. Is it, does it get any clearer than this? That this was Donald Trump's kind of plan, if you will. It's going to go about as well as Obamacare did. Better than what we had, which was absolutely nothing, but it's still complete trash because Obama tried to do a half measure. No half measures. Half measures lead to trash. We need to solve the healthcare problem.
Staff or administrative bodies, in non-governmental organizations, or other equities and interests close to the government. The president must set and enforce a plan for the executive branch. Sadly, however, a president today assumes office to fin a sprawling federal bureaucracy that all too often is carrying out its own policy plans and preferences. Or worse yet, the policy plans and preferences of a radical, supposedly woke faction of the country. The modern conservative president's task is to limit, control, and direct the executive branch on behalf of the American people. This challenge is created and exacerbated by factors like Congress's decades-long tendency to delegate its lawmaking power to agency bureaucracies, the pervasive notion of expert independence that
Okay, they said that Congress is delegating their lawmaking task to agencies. No, they're not. They were never doing that. They delegate regulation to agencies. And regulating should be the job of agencies. It shouldn't be done by Congress because Congress doesn't know what they're doing. They're not like EPA scientists. The EPA can hire scientists to push through regulation, and regulating is way too in-depth and difficult and time-consuming for Congress to pass a law for every single regulation. It's not feasible. They didn't delegate their lawmaking to somebody. They delegated their regulation production or whatever to scientists. Scientists make these decisions now, as they should, rather than lawyers and stuff in Congress.
So-called expert authorities from scrutiny, the presumed inability to hold career civil service.
Oh my God, I'm sorry. We have to step back, listen to this whole thing in context. Supposed experts. They're saying supposed experts do the regulating now. Right. Let me explain. If regulation needs to be passed in the United States before like the EPA existed or before any whatever other thing, before any regulatory agencies existed, it had to be passed as a law by Congress. If they weren't allowed, or if we wanted to like ban global tetrahedron from dumping chemicals, like cancer-causing chemicals in a lake, we had to have Congress pass a law to ban that. We couldn't just, say, don't do that anymore. And as everybody knows, passing laws is like a complete pain in the ass. It takes forever. So Congress, decades and decades ago, started creating regulatory agencies. And these regulatory agencies, like the EPA, hire scientists. They put scientists on staff to determine if this is beneficial or if it's dangerous or helpful or what. The EPA hires scientists to make decisions about this stuff. Now, listen one more time to what Project 2025 says about scientists making these decisions.
Lawmaking power to agency bureaucracies, the pervasive notion of expert independence that protects so-called expert authorities from scrutiny, the presumed inability to hold career civil servants accountable for their performance, and the increasing reality that many agencies are not only too big and powerful, but also increasingly weaponized against the public.
Okay, the EPA is weaponized against the public in their minds. They are unaccountable because they can't be fired without cause. And they're so-called experts because they got a college education. And as we know, anybody that gets a college education is not really an expert. They pretend it's a pretend expert situation. These people are like truly disgusting. I mean, the Project 2025 writers, the Heritage Foundation, disgusting people with the things that they say, think, do, and believe.
President who is elected by the people and empowered by the Constitution to govern. In Federalist Number 47, James Madison warned that the accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary, in the same hands, whether of one, a few, or many, and whether hereditary, self-appointed, or elective, may justly be pronounced the significant degree, the modern executive branch, which, whether controlled by the bureaucracy or by the president, writes federal policy, enforces that policy, and often adjudicates whether that policy was properly drafted and enforced.
They just quoted the Federalist Papers. How old are the Federalist Papers? They're like 200 years old, right? When were Federalist Papers written? Between October 1787 and May 1788. So 250 years old, give or take. And at the time they were written at a period of U.S. history when we were just forming out the structure of our government and what it would be and how it would look. We wrote a state constitution. I'm sorry, we wrote a federal constitution at this point. I think it had just been ratified or is about to be ratified officially, 1787. And there were founding fathers who were still trying to decide on how the government would look, like outside of just the Constitution. Some of them wanted a strong federal government. Some of them wanted a small federal government. Some wanted like the states to control pretty much everything. And the federal government just to kind of outline basic stuff, and then that was it. We ended up with a strong federal government, which is good. We needed that, in my opinion, because the Constitution of the federal government outlines protections that should exist for people. And it is the only reason why we were able to ban slavery from the United States entirely. For example, the federal government also provides aid to the states when some disaster takes place. It protects people from all kinds of stuff, from companies taking advantage of them or lying or whatever other thing. Consumer Financial Protection Bureau and a bunch of other stuff. We need a strong federal government. But they're going all the way back to 1788 to find an example of a founding father arguing whether we should have a strong federal government. Now, we have a situation where there are scientists in charge at the EPA who decide what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable for the companies to do. If it's okay to dump carcinogens in a lake that people use for drinking. And they find this line in the Federalist Papers that basically says, if the person in government isn't elected and they don't have an end date, then it's a dictatorship. They're using the Federalist Papers' description of a dictatorship to justify eliminating the EPA. This is a fucking joke. Are these people's brains broken? How did this happen? Now, let's just step back. Listen to that whole section one more time in context.
May justly be pronounced the second degree, the modern executive branch, which, whether controlled by the bureaucracy or by the president.
By the way, they call that the fourth branch of government. I mean, the Heritage Foundation, the Project 2025 people, they call federal workers the fourth branch of government, like the EPA and the SEC and, FDA and the FBI and all that. But it's all under the executive branch. Actually, it's just the third branch.
Writes federal policy, enforces that policy, and often adjudicates whether that policy was properly drafted and enforced. The overall situation is constitutionally dire, unsustainably expensive, and in urgent need of repair. Nothing less than the survival of self-governance in America is at stake. The great challenge confronting a conservative president is the existential need for aggressive use of the vast powers of the executive branch to return power, including power currently held by the executive branch, to the American people.
You catching what they just said? Aggressive use of the executive branch, i.e., we intend to violate the law in egregious ways and completely ignore the court system when we do. When they say that this is unacceptable, you can't do this. Andrew Jackson, when he was president, I believe that he was doing the Trail of Tears, a full-blown genocide against Native Americans. And the Supreme Court ruled against him doing that. They said, you can't do that. You need to stop. And Andrew Jackson said, well, they've made their ruling. Now they can enforce it, pointing out that the Supreme Court doesn't have any power because the executive branch is the enforcement arm of the government. They are the ones that do the enforcing. So Congress makes the laws. They have the power of the purse. They decide where money is allocated. The Supreme Court decides if things are in line with existing laws or the Constitution or whatever else. And the executive branch is tasked with executing all of the laws, carrying them all out and everything, and making sure that, like, the rule of law is respected. Andrew Jackson realized that the Supreme Court didn't have any power. It only had as much power as he gave it, because he's the one that enforces the Supreme Court's rules. So they ruled against Andrew Jackson, and he said, then enforce it, i.e., he completely ignored it. That is a dictatorial decision that is a blight on American history and a horrific precedent to set. Like, disturbing as shit. The only reason the United States functions is because people believe that it should, but they believe that it should operate in a specific way. And up to this moment in history, up to right now, it has operated that way because people believed in it. And not just Democrats, but everybody. Like, even Republican nutcases believe that the Constitution was handed down by God, so they respect what the Constitution says. That's why Mike Pence prevented, didn't allow Donald Trump to steal the presidency in 2020, because he respected the Constitution too much to allow him to do it. That's why Donald Trump said that Mike Pence, he told him to his face, you're too honest, Mike. It's not just Democrats that believe in the Constitution, it's Republicans too. Some of them, is my point here. J.D. Vance was asked about this. Let me read you this article here. J.D. Vance is unfit to be vice president of the United States for many reasons, chiefly because he has shown a disregard for the constitutional balance of powers and the rule of law. This, by the way, is Wall Street Journal. J.D. Vance's Disregard for the Rule of Law is the title, by William Galston. Written July 30th, 2024. In a 2021 interview with podcast host Jack Murphy, Mr. Vance said that if Donald Trump is reelected, he should sack federal agency workers en masse. That's what we're watching happen. This is happening. This is it. I am like white as a ghost because of this lighting. Let me fix it. Mr. Vance said if he could give Trump one piece of advice, it would be this: fire every single mid-level bureaucrat, every civil servant in the administrative state. Replace them with our people. And when the courts, because you know it'll get taken to court, and when the courts stop you, stand before the country like Andrew Jackson did and say, the Chief Justice has made his ruling, now let him enforce it. Just because it's happened once in history does not mean it should be repeated. Like I said, that is a blight on American history, that moment in time. It's a horrific, disturbing piece of history that shouldn't be repeated under any circumstances, that we should use as a lesson for how government should not run. This is the president taking dictatorial powers, is what's being described here. And J.D. Vance says that's what the president should do. That's what Donald Trump should do. And that's what he's doing. That's what Project 2025 is describing, exactly that. One more time.
Existential need for aggressive use of the vast powers of the executive branch to return power, including power currently held by the executive branch, to the American people. Success in meeting that challenge will require a rare combination of boldness and self-denial. Boldness to bend or break the bureaucracy to the presidential will, and self-denial to use the bureaucratic machine to send power away from Washington and back to America's families, faith communities, local governments, and states.
That obviously is complete bullshit, that they're trying to send it back to the American people. Like, how could they possibly interpret anything that they're describing as returning power to the American people? It's not. It's consolidating power with the president. They're literally describing, as they said, boldness to break the rule of law. How did they word it? Hold on. Oh my God. There.
Existential need for aggressive use of the vast powers of the executive branch.
Aggressive use of the powers of the executive branch.
To return power, including power currently held by the executive branch, to the American people. Success in meeting that challenge will require a rare combination of boldness and self-denial.
Boldness and self-denial. When we take power in the White House, we're going to need boldness and self-denial to accomplish what we intend to accomplish. And what is that?
Boldness to bend or break the bureaucracy to the presidential will, and self-denial to use the bureaucratic machine to send power away from Washington and back to America's families, faith communities.
So boldness to break the rule of law by firing all the federal workers against the law and installing your own loyalists, by canceling all federal funding, which is not in the president's purview. That's money already allocated by Congress. President has no role in that. His role is to distribute it, to enforce it. He's doing exactly what Andrew Jackson did by canceling federal funding, for example. That's what they're saying. Break the law to empower yourself, to consolidate power. That is what Project 2025 is about.
Local governments and states. Fortunately, a president who is willing to lead will fit in the...
By the way, what Andrew Jackson did, that was called a constitutional crisis. A constitutional crisis happens when the president breaks the Constitution or otherwise ignores it, and there's nothing that anybody can do to change it. They can't fix it. They can't stop it. They can't whatever. That's it. That's what it is. So you have lost your rights because the president is refusing to honor them. That's a constitutional crisis, and that is what we're in right now. People may not realize the president does not have the right to stop federal funding like this. He conditioned federal funding. He said, I will continue federal funding after I review those programs and make sure that they're in line with my goals. No, you won't. That is a violation of the Constitution. But who's going to stop him? We're in a constitutional crisis, and Project 2025 writers put us there. Kevin Roberts, the head of Project 2025, put us there.
Executive Office of the President, EOP, the levers necessary to reverse this trend and impose a sound direction for the nation on the federal bureaucracy. The effectiveness of those EOP levers depends on the fundamental premise that it is the president's agenda that should matter to the departments and agencies that operate under his constitutional authority.
So here's the thing. What do we do next? We are in a constitutional crisis. How do we solve it? How do we get out of it? The answer is we can only rely on the courts now. The courts will inevitably decide that the Constitution is being violated by Donald Trump. When the courts decide that and order the executive branch to continue payments, Trump can come back and just say, no. Then enforce your ruling, as J.D. Vance said. Enforce it. When that happens, we truly do live in a dictatorship from that moment forward. No longer a constitutional crisis. It's just been thrown out. Anyway, unfortunately, I have to get it. I wish I was making better time on this, but I feel like breaking it down is important. Like every step that we take, we should break it down, I think.